Sorry for the technical difficulties. We started out the show here with Sarah Geronimo, who's a Filipino singer and a sensation, doing her rendition of what's our theme song, right? What's Going On, which, by the way, CNN calls the anthem of a generation here, or an age. We knew that, but it's nice to get confirmation. And I'm joined today by our guests, starting looking at my screen, all doctors. Dr. Kyoko Toyama from, you're in counseling department, right, Kyoko? Is that correct? Yeah. By the way, you're muted. And Dr. Frank Wang from math, engineering, and computer science department, both have been on my show before as guests. And a newbie to the show, Dr. Sigmund Shen from the English department, who our former chapter chair in the union, where he you were a very well-known figure in that role, Sigmund. So
not
welcome.
As infamous as you, Hugo.
Pardon me?
Not as infamous as you.
Infamous is the phrase there, right? Or say infamous. Anyhow, welcome everybody. And as I said, usually on the show I have everybody talk a little bit about themselves. And like I said, since Kyoko and Frank have been on before, I'm going to give an opportunity. Somebody's got a truck back there, right? I was going to give Sigmund the opportunity to talk a little bit about his background and studies and coming to LaGuardia. Would you like to take a moment?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say. I went to Queens College, graduated in 91, studied English there, went to NYU for grad school, started working at LaGuardia in 2004. Loved working here, and very, very happy I had the chance to serve as chapter chair, and happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's funny because, I had worked at LaGuardia in the 90s and then came back, but by 2004 I was pretty knee deep, even though I was just an adjunct. And everybody I met was like, I assumed you all had been here from ages, and especially because Sigmund, you went on to become chapter chair. So I thought of you as like a longtime LaGuardia member, but
I always felt that way about you. That's funny. I was.
I mean, in some sense, because I knew people. I was certainly comfortable in the environment. And anyhow, but welcome. And the topic for today is the rise of anti-Asian violence as a result, or should I say, in the time of COVID, right? In the pandemic, and obviously, it's Asian Heritage Month, and there's been a lot of activities around this, and there are more coming. But I thought it was important, and it was kind of funny because I can't remember when I first reached out to the three of you a while ago, and then all of a sudden people were putting together these events, and so it's and I'm grateful that you were here today, and we have the time. But I wanted to talk about this a while ago. So let's talk about it. I mean, I guess the question I would ask the three of you is, do you agree that there is a spike in anti-Asian violence, and how are you seeing it, and what's your experience of it? I know who'd like to go first.
Well, I can start.
Yeah, why don't you go start?
I was muted, so I'm Kyoko from counseling department that still exists as part of the departments. We have a PMB, but I am
education and language acquisition.
I'm sorry.
Are you ELA?
No, counseling department. Counseling department.
I am right. So you are. I was right.
Yeah. You're right. You're correct.
Yeah,
right.
Sorry.
But I do adjunct in the ELA department. So for several years, so I've been involved with their programs too. But anyway, I'm a counselor, faculty counselor, only person remaining as a faculty counselor in the college discovery program. So we do have a captive audience, meaning students we serve. Those students are students with high financial and academic need, but they have potentials to succeed. So we have wonderful students we serve. But anyway, so your question about it's interesting because problems have been there. Asian people, I don't want to get into the history, but basically Asians have been targeted for a variety of reasons for many years, but it just didn't surface. And I don't want to sort of promote the stereotypes, but many of the Asians don't really speak up and address it. And I think this was confirmed by Commissioner of Human Rights in New York City, who came to speak to us last week. Even though it's a hate crime, many of the Asians don't really report to the police. So that's one thing. But what I really wanted to share today is really how this is impacting me personally, not just as a counselor. Because as a counselor, my job is to listen to students who bring in some concerns and issues. But this started last year, not just recently. Recently, it's just heightened. But just in the last, I would say 2 months, because of all these really covert or overt attacks on Asian Americans. And I initially thought, oh, it's not going to happen to New Yorkers or us, because we have diverse and all kinds of students. And so when I heard about the incident in Oakland, California, I was alerted, but I never thought this was going to happen to us. Then I started hearing all these incidents. And then actually most of the targets are my sort of generation. And so what happened was I saw myself trying to cover myself. Every time I go out, I put my mask, which is convenient, everybody does. And I put the sunglasses and I put a hat so that nobody sees my East Asian face, which I never had to do that. And I wouldn't go out with, myself. I would make sure to have somebody big and tall with me as a bodyguard, sort of. So that's what has happened to me. But also, I became very conscious about how people might be, because no matter how careful you are, there are always people who just don't like the way you look. So that's one thing happening with my life and with myself. It's very unfortunate because I'm a pretty strong lady and I'm not afraid of things, but I became more conscious about this. So I'm going to stop right here and then I will talk to you later about what's been happening with LaGuardia and what we're doing.
All right. Gentlemen?
Maybe I can follow up on what Kyoko has described. I'm sorry, you probably hear sirens. We live in New York City. That's the
right.
Standard background. Anyway, I want to follow up what Kyoko just described to us. Yesterday, I was talking to my older friend. She's Japanese. She's 82 years old. And she said that she's so afraid of going out in the park. I think merely the fact that she's afraid of going out, I think this is how serious the situation is. Personally, I can say I'm fortunate that I have not experienced physical violence personally or even witness one, but I do have some unpleasant episodes, probably because of my race, that can be subtle and implicit. Maybe we can talk about that. I know that some LaGuardia students experience ugly confrontations. Professor Tim Sao of English department has been systematically asking his students to describe their experiences, and I have read some of the stories. I think some of the accounts are very disturbing. So I will let Sigmund to say something before we can talk about further details.
Yeah, deep dive. Okay. Sigmund?
Okay. I mean, I think when you grow up in New York, you kind of have to have a thick skin in some ways. You kind of learn defense mechanisms. You learn self-protective behaviors. You grow up, you go on the subway during rush hour, right? And everyone's going to do certain things and actually feel certain things too, right? So when you ask, do I agree there's a spike? Well, it's like climate change. The numbers show that there's a spike, but on the other hand, crime fluctuates. If you read the New York Post, you're going to see scary stories that, New York Post builds its whole newspaper on the trade of scaring people, right? By you'll see people reading the New York Post on the subway and muttering to themselves and getting freaked out by, stories about random crime. So it's partly that it's real because it's been reported, it's in the numbers, and I believe in science, and it's partly that it's crime will go up and down, and it doesn't always fit exactly the narrative of what the police are doing or what the government's doing. So,
do you think we're just paying more attention all of a sudden? And now that when we see violence against someone who is Asian, the media is saying, "Oh, look, there it is. See, it's a spike."
I mean, sure. It's also that I think Asians are speaking out more, right? Asians are protesting more, right? Asians are linking with other groups, right? I mean, when you're growing up here, sometimes it's subtle, like Frank said. Sometimes it's very, very hard to tell. I mean, if you're a woman, if you're a black person in the city, you could be afraid for your life any second leaving your house, right? For a while after 9/11, it was the Muslims' turn, right? If you're a tourist, you always have a target on you, right? So sometimes it's very subtle, but sometimes it's not subtle at all. Sometimes it's super clear, right? When I was growing up, I remember the kid who spat on me, right? I remember the guy in a passing car who used the C word. I don't want to get into details because we were at this other meeting where people were saying sometimes you bring up people's trauma by going into details. So, but you definitely hear racist talk. I grew up in Queens in the suburbs. You wouldn't just hear stuff directed at you. Like you could be going to like a picnic or a barbecue and people would use the N word. And that is directed against you as a person of color, right? Because it's like, it's not against your group specifically, but it's meant as a warning. It's meant to make you feel uncomfortable. It's meant to make you have to watch what you say, During the pandemic, I mean, I've been lucky, but there was the guy who muttered something and came too close to me and my kid on the street. There was a guy who made some incredulous noise and asked me a question about my Black Lives Matter t-shirt. There was the woman who stared at me on the subway, And, as Asians, we also have to deal with our older generation, our parents who are really scared to go out, who won't, my mom feels bad taking a walk with me because she doesn't feel safe. Our friends who share articles and feel scared and want to talk about it. That's emotional labor too, And of course, there's the guy who was president last year, and don't want to get into that.
Right.
I think let me just say, not about what Sigmund said, but when you can see Sigmund is American born. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And Frank and I, we are from other countries. We came to this country. So when you hear about the racism, it's a really new concept. And I'm saying this because it happens to students too. Our students who are immigrants, all of a sudden they're placed as a minority, in a part of the minority. But American-born students also, they grew up with this, just like Sigmund. So, and especially Asians have been always treated as forever foreigner. So I'm sure Sigmund can maybe say, but my Japanese American roommate who was born and raised third generation, parents grew up in internment camp. They were continuously asked where they are from and how come they speak English very well. So this forever foreigner has been really placed on Asians and Asian Americans in this country. So I just want to, because the Sigmund experience may be different from the way Frank and I, but at the same time, the racism we experience is basically the same.
And also I want to say that probably I'm not that young, but I'm relatively young, probably compared with other people. So like what Sigmund said, we have our street smart. You walk fast, you don't have eye contact with other people. But when I see older people, and really, regardless whether this is a fluctuation or this is a real trend, the psychological impact to people that's undeniable. In addition to the older friend I mentioned earlier, I was walking near Columbia University. For those people who know Columbia University, the Morningside Drive that connect to Columbus Avenue. So I saw an older gentleman with grocery, walk slowly on Columbus Avenue, then all in a sudden I just feel that how vulnerable a person can be. And I was thinking that when I grew older, if I am like, when I cannot walk as fast as I'm doing right now, am I going to experience this kind of fear? So that just struck me at that moment.
Yeah, this is all real, and Sigmund talks about was just talking about how crime fluctuates and things fluctuate, and we go through these periods. I mean, I thought when Obama got into office that was the end of racism. I mean, I remember doing an interview, and I thought that he could change that, and of course, what we experienced was the opposite, right? Which is it just kind of brought it all to manifest, and the fact that as a result of the last administration, people felt emboldened to behave, to not be civil, to act out on the darker aspects of their thinking. But one of the things that I was thinking about as I was getting ready for this show was the fact that whether there's a spike or not, that it helped me get in touch with the fact that I think Kyoko talked about this, and we can talk. You didn't go into the history of it, but my from what I can tell in my experience is that this has been an aspect of our country, the United States. I was born here too, Cuban American, Afro Chinese Cuban American. All right, because Kyoko knows this because I've talked about that I can trace back my father's side of the family to a Cantonese man who was probably shanghaied and dragged to Cuba as an indentured servant. Luckily survived the forced labor that it would have taken to pay for his passage, and then married a mulatto, Cuban woman, and that's one side of the family, and you can see it whenever we all, my father, my sister, and I all, have aspects of our, demeanor that show Asian. But I was again looking at the history; it's been constant. I personally, and maybe this is where the infamous part that Sigmund talks about Hugo, is I see the colonialism, the European colonialism of the Western Hemisphere as anti-Asian violence, because the fact that the people who were populating the continent had come from Asia, right? And when you talk to people who live in communities where there are still Native Americans are prevalent, they talk about how what Kyoko talked about is the forever foreigner, the forever other, in the terrible ways that Native Americans are treated in this country. But again, and also I looked up, Rick Burns made a documentary, or was involved with making a documentary about the Asian Exclusion Act, which is the only population that has ever been denied entry into the United States, by an act of Congress. And but before that had even been on the books, there had already been a lot of violence towards Asians in the United States, particularly as a result, like during the gold rush and the settlement of California. Is horrendous behavior. So the history is there. And what Kyoko is saying, this has been a constant thread to the of the history of the United States. But every time when things get stressful, right? And again, the administration basically blaming China for the pandemic, and then people looking around. I mean, people not wanting to shop, not shop and buy, even eat Asian food. But then all of a sudden now people are like, I mean, I saw a video, woman attacking two women with a hammer. And I'm sad to say it was an African American woman who's doing it. So that's what's really kind of, as immigrant populations, or populations, whatever you want to call us, folks who are struggling socioeconomically, find themselves pitted against each other for opportunities. So even if we could not agree that there is a spike, we can agree that this exists. And so what do we do?
Yeah, I think you raise a good point that it is pitting us against one another. It's also good to note that, to be targeted for your skin color, for your religion, for your gender, for any reason, right? That that category doesn't just include attacks by others, or attacks by white people, or attacks by non-white people. It also includes attacks by your own group. I mean, the only time I was ever physically assaulted growing up in New York, I'm 52 years old, was by Asian people. I mean, and you're in certain situations, like in high school. My high school was like 30-40% Asian. In the 80s, that was a lot, right? So I should have been safe, right? But I was very often in terror. I was very often threatened by other Asians at my high school, right? In Queens and Manhattan, Chinatown. I mean, the only time I ever got punched out was I was on a picket line in Chinatown, and it was people sent by the sweatshop bosses. They target you because you're Asian, even if they are Asian, because they wouldn't be able to get away with it with, like Hugo said, the colonialism and the heritage of that keeps white people, well, wealthy white people, wealthy white ruling class folks safer, right? They're not as easy to target. So definitely, I think that we are being pitted against one another. It's inevitable, because I do believe that Trump basically gave people permission, and you're going to have people, no matter what background, who are going to, have day-to-day struggles and go through suffering, and they're going to find a scapegoat. That's what a scapegoat is, right? And people are not crazy,
To blame people. But
Yeah.
Frank, you want to say something? I see you going for your mute button.
I was just saying that, since Hugo is asking about solution, and we are all educators, I'm still hopeful that through education we can change people's behavior. Earlier we mentioned that basically I can say that racism exists in every culture, and in United States, despite its imperfection, I do think that every student in United States have experienced some of the we have been taught that discrimination is not acceptable. But in other countries, such as I grew up in Taiwan, this kind of curriculum is not emphasized. Taiwan is not a multiracial country. And in some other countries, I think they have not emphasized on this kind of the equality and the anti-discrimination aspects in their curriculum. So once again, I don't really have a magic bullet, but through education, I hope this will be one way that we can achieve a better society.
Well, oh yeah, Kyoko, go ahead.
Oh no. So I'm not only just a thinker but also I'm a doer. And I think I'm the one who has been around the longest at LaGuardia. So sometimes, when you see something like this, oh yeah, we've been there, we've done it. So sometimes it's important to look at what we have done very well. And I think it was almost 25 years ago, Chancellor Reynolds, I think, mandated every college to establish pluralism task force. And I don't remember if it was anything, related to negative, accident that prompted her to start. But anyway, so it was a mandate. So every college had that. And then I was on a committee, and every department represented somebody. And we did the survey. We also revised curriculum, every single class. And some of them are still there because I see some of the syllabus reflect pluralism. So one thing we can do, I think, Frank mentioned about the education. Yes, definitely we should do education. In a way, I've been happy this semester because Asian American Heritage Month, that happens every year. But we really expanded. And I think, Hugo, because of the, I guess, spotlight, this is not the way to get the spotlight, but because of what's happening, all of a sudden, spotlight is on us. And we try to respond to that by providing all these, activities, but also educational programs. And they're not carried out only by Asian and Asian American faculty. That's the beauty of it. So that's one thing we could do. But also, professional development subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. We have had a number of workshops on microaggression in the last few years. But now what's coming and what's important is a bystander training.
Yes.
So I really want to suggest to the administration, I mean, Chancellor hasn't really said much, but if our administration can kind of mandate, because, people who come to these workshops, unfortunately, but it's okay, we are sort of the converts. They have been already involved. So of course they can get more new additional training, but only way to really get everybody buy into this education is to mandate. And sometimes you have to call on some of the people who need to be in these workshops. So I would like to suggest these to the administration and departments. See, that's how we can create a climate of safety. And then finally, we will be able to educate our students, but also we get educated by student. I think Friday, Rachel did a fantastic job, and the team, this anti-racist pedagogy, and it was well attended. So I think it's a sort of a bottoms up in a way, but I hope we can do this together, collectively. And also collectiveness is coming from Asian values. So that's what I'm thinking. Because also I have been involved with the Asian American Research Institute of CUNY. What's happening is also different campuses, we're getting together. So more activities and more meetings will be happening in CUNY, which is very promising to me, Hugo. So I think I'm hopeful, like Frank was saying, but we all have to get involved with this initiative.
And we're at the half-hour mark. I just want to say you're watching the show's What's Going On. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on LaGuardia Web Radio, WLGR. And my guests today, Doctors Kyoko Toyama from the Counseling Department, Frank Wang from the Math, Engineering, and Computer Science Department, and Sigmund Shen from the English Department, and our former chapter chair for the PSC. And when you were talking about a lot of trainings in Kyoko, because Kyoko, you have history with the college as well, right? You've been here a long time. I was looking up in the bottom of my syllabus, the end of my syllabus, which is at this point completely out of control. It's like 16 pages long. And part of this has to do with, I don't know what, my charts or something. But I have the pluralism statement, which is an old statement that's been here forever. And I was kind of looking through it to see which one of these things apply. And there's a lot of things. But at the end, one of the last bullet points under it is this one that says confront. The expression of dehumanizing stereotypes, incidents where individuals or groups are excluded because of difference, the intolerance of diversity, and the forces of racism, sexism, heterosexism, homophobia, disability discrimination, ageism, classism, and ethnocentrism that fragment the community into antagonistic individuals and groups. This is something, I can't remember when I started adding this, maybe, I can't remember, Vera Albrecht or somebody who tells us how to do our syllabi from the academic standing committee and things like that. But yeah, I've woven it in there because I teach art and we have so many different things that we're talking about, different countries and thoughts. So I just say this is we got to live this way here, and so it's not okay, But what you were saying about this bystander training, which, by the way, also ties into microaggressions, which has been a very hot, before the pandemic, we were talking about this, like workplace bullying and microaggressions. One of the only ways to diffuse a supervisor who's engaging in this kind of behavior is when you've got enough people under their supervision that take issue. And I mean, we know about this recent staff survey, which brought some concerns to light. Is this the solution then? I mean, Sigmund or Frank, that we have to get, when people are observing that kind of behavior, we got to get involved. I don't know how to. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I was going to start the show today with a clip from Kung Fu. All right, where David Carradine walks into a bar for a glass of water so he could take his herbal, whatever it was, And there's, the Chinese folks in the community are like looking in the window, like, what's he doing? Doesn't he know it? And some big guy comes after him. And of course, he's Kwai Chang Caine. You can't mess with him. But but I'm not quite Chan Kane, though I'd like to be. I wanted to be as a kid when I was being bullied, and I want to be him when I find out about this kind of stuff. But very few of us are, Shaolin priests, and capable of, doing all kinds of things, kicking a knife out of a guy's hand and letting it stick on the ceiling, right? So we have to become quite Chan Kane through the aggregate. Is this the solution then?
I mean,
Bystander Training.
I used to love that show. We're not David Carradine, but you know what? You go to stand. You know what, Hugo? I've seen you stand at protests, and you're not Che Guevara, but you didn't let the fact that you're not Che Guevara stop you from practicing solidarity and showing up and protesting and calling out. I really love that thing on your syllabus you put about, like, my former favorite word was refuse, but now because of you, and my new favorite word is confront. I think that's awesome. I think that we have to acknowledge that education, unfortunately and sadly, has been a little bit overrated. All of these efforts are important. Kyoko efforts at LaGuardia have been so important, and I'm proud to join with her in some of these efforts, right? But a lot of the people in this country and around the world who have the power and who benefit from groups being pitted against one another are educated, are wealthy, are probably really nice people, and would even speak out against a lot of this street crime, without acknowledging the basic causes of it. I mean, I was crushed when I found out Mitt Romney had been an English major in college, Education is important, but there are other kinds of education, Going to a protest is education. Giving out a flyer is education. Asking questions is education. If you're, I'm not a confrontational person. I have been guilty of being a passive bystander when other groups were targeted, right, in my life. The Me Too movement has definitely awakened me and made me think very carefully about my own behavior and my own passiveness and my own, how they say if you're neutral, then you're taking the side of the oppressor. And Me Too has shown us that, right? We have to confront more. So that's a really good reminder. But sometimes, like you say, we can do it collectively, I mean, one example for me is, tomorrow at this talk with the Dean Salnav is doing the town hall meeting about violence against Asians. Is at 2:15 tomorrow? I think Dean Salnav sending out an email about it tomorrow. We're going to be talking about one manifestation of identity politics, right? Identity politics can be really important, but if it cuts you off from other groups, it can actually make oppression even more dangerous, right? One manifestation of that for Asians is the mono-minority myth, right? And that's like this belief that we're partly fed and partly conditioned and trained to believe, but partly can be very easy and tempting to believe, right? That we have cultural advantages that are not our fault, but because of those cultural advantages belong to us, we should take advantage of them, right? And that can actually hurt our group from inside. So one example that I really find hope in is an example not of education, but of protest. A few years back, you guys remember Proposition 187 in California?
I think so, but I forgot what it was about.
It's this big move where it was I think it was in the 90s.
It was going to take away benefits from if you weren't a citizen or something.
So if you were undocumented, you couldn't go to a hospital. You couldn't get served in the emergency room. The police couldn't help you. You basically would have to go underground. You could be bullied and the police you'd never be able to report it to the police. I mean, there's a milder version here, right? If you punish employers for hiring undocumented workers, that's a milder form of it because it still draws people underground, right? But when they first proposed Proposition 187, the majority of Asians in California were in support of it. And many Latinos and African Americans were in support of it also. But a few months later, protests, rallies, demonstrations, activists went on TV, they wrote op-eds, and even though the law eventually passed, it was challenged in court, it was struck down. And before it passed, they kept checking the polling, and there had been a change in the rate of Asian support for Proposition 187. Right before it was voted on, a majority opposed it. That change didn't happen, because of, everyone got sent to college. It was because people were out on the street talking about it and making it an issue. So, people willing to speak about it and also work in solidarity with other groups and empathize with other groups and see commonalities, I think made a huge difference. And I think that shows that we can fight back together, and it gives me hope.
And just
Kyoko?
to add, because I want Frank to talk too, but just to remember, just recently, about 3 weeks ago, because Hugo, you talked about the importance of history, which is really true. And in a first town hall meeting, we did that. And hopefully tomorrow, Joyce Moy, who is the executive director of Asian American and Research Institute, is going to talk a little bit about it. But Ohio or Indiana, they passed a resolution to include Asian American history as a mandate in a school system. So that's a really, important move. And also, everybody sort of should be more like, faculty can encourage students to participate in these workshops when they hear about it. And curiosity is really important for all of us. It's just because it's somebody else's history, it's not American. It is an American history. So, and the other thing is, I sent the email, I think in March, when this Asian hate started to surge to the college community, and some people responded to my email. But I think one thing I mentioned in that was, sometimes it's important, of course, like Sigmund, we should go out and rally. That's one form of social justice sort of activities. But sometimes you can just, reach out to your friend or neighbors of Asian descent and ask how they're doing. To me, that is part of the social justice. So there are all kinds of ways to get engaged with, social justice movement or civic engagement. So I just wanted to tell you, because otherwise people say, oh, I don't have time. And no, you don't have to go out on the street all the time. You can write letters. And if your faculty can maybe just ask a whole class, how this is impacting you, not just Asians. How is it impacting you?
When you say how, what is impacting them?
This Asian American violence against Asian Americans.
Yeah.
Because it's not just our issue, and sometimes we are spotlighted. So what do you think? What you should be doing? I think it's a question to all. To me.
Frank, did you want to add anything to this?
There were several topics when both Kyoko and Sigmund were talking. I thought maybe I can add a few things. So I am kind of backtracking some of the issues. One thing, when you talk about bystander, I remember reading a document, and I will try to find if I can still share that with you or with students. They were saying that if you see somebody who's harassing another person on the subway, there are some of the distracting techniques. For instance, you simply ask the person what time it is, or is this Times Square stop? Maybe you can just distract people. There are some of the interesting strategy, and that's practical. Perhaps after the show, I will try to find a document. Maybe Hugo can help us to disseminate that information to people to be on the more practical side.
Maybe we should do a training on the air. Live. Well, I guess it would be a Zoom meeting, wouldn't it?
Okay. So let me try to find a document.
Yeah, sure.
And the other issue is talking. Somebody mentioned microaggression. Because in LaGuardia, at least on campus, I suppose overt discrimination or violence, probably that's not very common. However, for me, I think related to what you mentioned, microaggression, sometimes it bothers me is stereotype. It's Asian stereotype, even if they portray you as a positive. For instance, I'm Asian, so I'm supposed to be good at math. And I think my math is not too bad, but sometimes it does bother you and restricts your kind of give people biased impression. As I say, even though the stereotype could be a positive thing, so relate to what I just mentioned about Asians are supposed to be good at math. This can create a problem when people in higher education, they have talked about a phenomenon called stereotype threats. So that's if you are Asian students, people anticipate that you are good at math, then in a way it can be, if I say that's performance anxiety, that can it negatively impact a student's performance. So that's us, LaGuardia faculty. I think we need to be aware of this kind of issue. Yeah, that's some of the psychological findings. That's what I try to be sensitive in my classroom, and maybe that will let Kyoko to. We have discussed about that because Kyoko is a trained psychologist, and she's also a counselor. So probably she can tell us a little bit more about the stereotype and the stereotype threat.
Yeah, we're by the way, we're moving into the last quarter hour, so folks can certainly put questions on the Twitch chat stream, and but usually I also talk about this part of the show where we talk about things we're planning to do in the future, as well as eventually saying our goodbyes and thanks. Interestingly, somebody put on the Twitch stream where we can want to become famous, buy followers. So we're getting bombed. Sorry, we're getting chat bombed on our Twitch stream. But Kyoko, yeah, I mean, you can ignore everything I just said and just pick up on what Frank was talking about.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, I think Frank is talking about the sort of not theory, but Dr. Claude Steele, who is a social psychologist at Stanford. He did a number of researches on mostly minority students who are sort of, PhD students and African-American PhD students studying in the Midwest. And they were asked to answer some questions about like athletic ability as opposed to academic ability. So sometimes because stereotypes can be placed on yourself too, because how you're perceived. So based on a stereotype, your responses are sort of swayed. We really need to be cognizant about how stereotypes are placed on you and how stereotypes you're placed on other people, because everybody has a stereotype, right? If we generate the stereotypes of agents, everybody can come up with that. And Frank talked about this certain subject and the career choice the Asian students are making, and because of that, a lot of students who are not so good at math or who are not interested in becoming a nurse, especially among Filipino students, they're suffering. So we really need to be careful about how we sort of put the people in a certain boxes. We cannot help it because this is what we have been doing for every single group. But I think we really need to be careful with this stereotype, because stereotypes are actually not all bad. Some of them are good. But we have to be able to differentiate between the good stereotypes and the bad stereotypes. But I don't think it's a good idea to even stereotype anybody. And I was just thinking, Frank, I think I remember, because I did go to the true trainings, Bystander Training by Holback. So if you're listening, you can go to the website, Holback, Hallback. Now they are officially training people in the New York City agencies. And 5 things that we need to be, I cannot explain every single one of them, but one is a distract. That's what Frank is talking about, right? Take the attention from somebody. Number 2 is delegate. You shouldn't be doing this because you might be putting yourself at risk. So you should really get help from other people around you. And 3 is a document, Frank, you talked about. You might want to take a video, but not in front of that person who is a perpetrator. Stay back and try to, because that's what happened to George Floyd's case, right? Very brave high school student took that. and that brought to the court. Then fourth one is delay. Check with the person. You might not be able to intervene right away, but stay with the person who might be feeling anxious and nervous. So you check with the person who was harassed. And then 5 is the direct. Assess your safety and speak up, and with the form of with firm and very clear message to perpetrator. But again, you have to be able to assess it, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation that you are in danger. But I really highly recommend. The other thing I would like to recommend is the Asian Americans. That's a Channel 13 is documentary that aired last year, but it's available. So I think I would like all of you to really learn about the Asian American history, so you understand how these, Hugo is talking about the Chinese American Exclusion Act. That's one of them, but there are many. The government was trying to exclude Asian Americans.
That's just the most organized form of it. By the way, it's Hollaback.
Hollaback, I'm sorry.
Hollaback.
Thank you.
Bystander Resources or Bystander Training. And it looks like it gets all mixed up with sexual harassment, getting in the middle of that as well. So,
yeah, thank you, Kyoko. You say that so much nicer than I did. So thank you. That's very useful, and you refresh my memory.
Things in the future we want to talk about. We got about a little over 5 minutes. We've got the training. Obviously, James Salnave's folks this is tomorrow, May 11th, Tuesday at 2:15 p.m. He just recently sent it out. He sent it out on May 4th at 1:15 p.m. But and you got a very large committee there of folks, which Sigmund, you and Sigmund are on. Sigmund's on it. Kyoko, you're not. Okay, you're on it. Frank, you're not on that committee. I guess you got enough committees going on, right? But
and Wednesday, there was one more thing. Wednesday, there's a professor from history, Robin Kietlinski, is doing a workshop on "I'm Not a Virus" workshop. So there are 2 more coming up from the Asian Heritage Month programs.
All right. To go back to that Chinese Exclusion Act movie, one of the things I found fascinating about it is that, one Chinese immigrant who had become, he'd lived in the United States for a long period of time, become I don't know if he was a resident or citizen, but he had traveled back to China at one point, and then came back again and was denied because of the Exclusion Act, was being denied. Now I know what it is. He was born here, and he was being denied entry, and he sued, and it went to the Supreme Court. And that case, and this is 19th century, that case is the precedent that allows for you to be declared a citizen of the United States upon birth.
Wow.
So I am a Cuban American by virtue of the fact that I was born in the United States only within a year of her exile. She had come to the United States, got together with my dad, bam, whatever you want call it, conceived in New York City, born in Miami, but I'm an American citizen. I could be president, and it's that, so again, that, what we owe to, and if you think about other folks who might find themselves, with the wrong headset and find themselves feeling negatively towards Asian Americans, might, again, their children can thank, especially with what was going on. Again, we talk about this. It's everybody takes a turn. Remember that, folks coming from Central South America who have been demonized, in whatever period for various reasons, right? And being separated, their children being born here, and the parents having to go back, and the madness that's causing with DACA, and our DACA stuff that has been going on. But we have an Asian American man born in the United States in the 19th century, who challenged and won, if you can imagine, in the Supreme Court in the 19th century. And for that reason, if you're born in the United States, you are an American. So it's interesting what comes of these kinds of, from like, the negativeness, that there still is something that we get out of it.
Yeah, the interesting thing to me about that is, since you brought up David Carradine and Kung Fu, I got to be allowed to bring up the show Warrior on HBO Max. Have you guys seen this?
No.
It's like it's based on Bruce Lee's notes from before, like the TV show that he wanted to do before they gave it to David Carradine.
Oh,
so I was watching,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. He was.
So that goes into history, and apparently, right after the Civil War ended, right? Obviously, America lost a tremendous source of free labor, right? Because suddenly it was illegal to own slaves, right? Within 10 years, the railroad companies in California were heavily recruiting Chinese to come here. And there was a panic because the Irish laborers on the railroads already had a certain, prevailing wage and prevailing conditions. And they were basically being undercut by these Chinese who were brought in here as cheap labor. It wasn't the Chinese fault. They were looking for, just like any immigrants, right? But they were used. And so when we were talking before about groups being pitted against each other, I'm not saying that capitalism is to blame for all racism, but it definitely makes racism a lot more dangerous, because one stereotype is, you're supposed to be better at math. Another stereotype is you're supposed to work hard and not complain and be a happy slave. And that actually made it really dangerous for the Chinese coolies. That probably is what led to Vincent Chin being killed, right? That economic, uncertainty and fear, And if we embrace model minority myth now, that's what we're going to talk about at the town hall tomorrow, how Asians kind of internalize this myth that they deserve their jobs and their income and whatever because they have cultural advantages, right? If we don't challenge that, then we're going to keep being separated from other groups, and that's going to benefit the people who want to keep wages low and want everyone to work for free.
Yeah, the introduction of the Chinese to Cuba was in response to the attempts at abolishing slavery, which I don't know if you know this, but Cuba was one of the last countries in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery.
Oh.
And one of the ways they did it was through coolies. And my ancestor was one of them, who were brought in. They were eventually paid, but paid less. Some, like I said, indentured servants, but they were really shanghaied. And it was fun. I remember growing up as a kid, and my father used to talk about the canton. And I would say, what is he talking about? And it was the fact that, our family on his side of the family went all the way back to this one Chinese immigrant. So, by the way, we've run out of time. So I just want to thank the three of you for taking your time to come on here, talk about something which is not easy. And then we, again, we don't have clear solutions, but we need to keep talking about, and, you want to come back, we could talk about this again. Maybe, whenever you want, but in the fall, if it hasn't, lifted, and that, my guess is it won't. But any last things you want to say? I'll give you any last thank yous, or go to James's thing on the 11th at 2:15. And just want to thank. So I'll just say I want to thank my guests today who came on the show to talk about anti-Asian violence and the spikes here in the United States. They are Dr. Kyoko Toyama of the Counseling Department, Dr. Frank Wang of Math, Engineering, and Computer Science, and Sigmund Shen of the English Department. Thanks for being on. And thank you for watching. I'm your host, Hugo Fernandez, here on What's Going On LaGuardia Radio WLGR, louder than you think. And Mr. Pope, please take us out. Thank you.
Thanks, Hugo.
Thanks, Hugo.